So I'm going to talk about learning. That's what I'm passionate about. I'm passionate about that stuff too, as some of the folks may tell you. But why am I going to talk about learning? We've got a lot of developers in this room, I hope, this being an open edX conference. And it turns out there are a lot of things that we can do with the platform, very low-hanging fruit, small design decisions that have a big impact on learning. And these aren't things that necessarily take a lot of time. They're just things that you have to be aware of the background of a little bit of cognitive science of how people learn, and a little bit about the ways that we don't use technology of how people learn. So my hope is to give a little bit of that background, a little bit of the background about how the platform was developed to support learning, to provide with that. The structure of the talk will be, first I'll give a little bit of historical background, a little bit of the environment in which MITx and edX came to be, and some of what we've known for a long time. A few case studies about how people are actually using edX for teaching and learning, and what that has shown about the effectiveness or lack of effectiveness, you'll decide for yourself, of the platform. And then a little about the design. What are the pedagogical foundations behind the platform? As well as, since this is, again, an open edX conference, perhaps low-hanging fruit and easy places to work on. Normally I'd skip the section where we are not great, but I'll toss it in this time, because hopefully one of you can fix it. So, our inspiration. MIT and Harvard dumped $60 million into this initiative. About a third of that is because they believe this would improve residential education. Why? Were they crazy? Well, I think to answer that, I'll pick a slide from, actually just one slide. This is a plot from a paper by Hockey in 1998, and it's comparing two types of courses. One is a traditional residential course, and one is a course using something called interactive engagement. And interactive engagement is any of a range of techniques where people are actually doing things. Problems, working in groups, clear questions, it all doesn't matter. And what he found was with a survey of 60 courses was that the courses with interactive engagement, the slope of this line is something called a learning gain. Learning gain is a way of controlling for prior knowledge. I won't go into details there. It's measured, this is physics courses, it's measuring something called the force constant inventory, very rigorous instrument. And the interactive engagement courses had a learning gain of 0.48, the traditional ones of 0.23. So very large difference in learning. And there are a couple of things to notice about this. First of all, this happened in 1998. That's when this paper was published. The work on this started in 1992. We've known this for a very long time. This is a meta-analysis. This is looking at 60 different courses over 6,000 students. At the time that the industry gets to where there are 60 classes over 6,000 students, this is a very well-developed set of techniques. This is not new. And around the time that this paper was published was also when schools like MIT and Harvard started to first incorporate techniques like this. The most prominent names are Eric Nusser at Harvard, probably the best physics course in the world, through basically every technique in physics education and research at that course. If any of you are in town for a while, I encourage you to visit. It's a spectator sport. There are literally researchers sitting on the side and teachers on the side watching this course to learn from it whatever he teaches. You email him, you set this up, and most classes there are a few people there on the side. So, TEAL at MIT was a more modest initiative, a Sense for Technology Enhanced Active Learning. In both cases, you saw consistent gains in student performance. Biology at MIT did this. Very large gains in learning. Students started scoring A's on all the exams, and they had to make them more difficult, increase the amount of material taught, and split it between increases in student grades and increases in the amount of material taught, because you can't give everybody A's, at least in the politics of that department. So there was a lot of evidence for this. And this was an environment in which MITx, a small project at MIT, was started, and later on edX was launched. So we built this platform to support these techniques. The first course we taught was 6 UX, a course in circuits and electronics. that was taught by Jerry Sussman, Chris Turman, myself, and Anand Agarwal. And the first time we really rigorously looked at how this course worked was actually because of this kind of inane criticism, or kind of very good criticism, depending on how you look at it. I have to share the criticism, but the criticism was, what do MIT and Harvard know about teaching the bottom 95%? This was all over the press. So we tried to run edX courses at community colleges and at a Cal State school, San Jose State University. San Jose State University has a large immigrant population, working adults, first generation college, very different demographic. They had an electronics course for the whole population. The instructor took 6 level WebS, the MIT course. The first level of it corresponded to the San Jose State course approximately, put it in instead of the lectures and recitations. Students would come to recitations and do small group problem solving, individual problem solving, and a little bit of lecture, which was geared to where they had probably the online component. So what do you think happened? So approximately. The first thing that happened was traditionally 59% of students will complete this course. That went up to 91%. And of that remaining 9%, many drop for a range of personal reasons, just you expect that with this demographic. If you control for that, it's actually much higher. With this much broader demographic, the exam performance, here's the distribution in the new section and in the old sections. And this difference actually grew as the instructor really hit the stride. And in future semesters, he went to cover the full MIT course.
Why are the lower grades? Can you explain again the differences between the...
So this is a distribution of what percent of students got what set of grades. So ideally you'd want a spike 100%. Sub-ideally you'd want a spike at 0%. These 3 plots are for the normal recitation sections. This is actually comparing previous semester to current semester. There's another randomized control trial with same semester, same results. This is exams designed for the San Jose State curriculum. And the blue plot over here is the students taking the blended version based on 6W2X. At San Jose State, correct. So,
good.
Yes! Higher grades, better pass rate by a big margin. It worked very well, we think. Again, we're a 3-year-old organization. These are early results. It's social sciences. Nothing you will see here is especially rigorous, especially the next one. The next one is an MIT chemistry course, 3091. MIT requires everybody at the school to take chemistry, and there are 2 options, traditional chemistry and solid-state chemistry. The solid-state chemistry course is taught by a fantastic set of instructors who experiment with this. It's actually the, by far, best chemistry course that I've seen, huge margin. It has a very nice, coherent intellectual narrative. It's a brilliant course. And it was already a little bit blended. Students would do 10 in-class assessments as well as that they would prepare for before class, as well as for exams. Many MIT courses also have a very low threshold for passing. You increase difficulty until students are getting many things wrong, so this class had a 50% threshold for passing. They did a very complex set of interventions, some related to MITx, some not, going from 2012 to 2013. And the most interesting intervention was how students did assessments. Students would go to a computer laboratory. They had a total of 37 assessments, or assessments on 37 topics from a random bank. They would go in a proctored environment, do an assessment, they do fine, they're done. They don't do fine, they can come back the next day and try again on a different random assessment. The delay was just, you don't want students just trying until they guess a correct answer, or otherwise get an easy problem. So that result, that course compared scores on the final exam, which was scored the same way. And what you see in the blue plot are on each of the problems of the final exam scores where students in 2012 got full credit. Red bar is where they got 80% credit, and green plot is the equivalent problem in 2013. So these are not identical problems, but they're from the same bank, they're calibrated to the same, and there's many of them. So we can see that there's more learning going on. The pass rates are actually very similar because of the low pass threshold, but there seems to be more learning going on. Students also really like the new assessment, although the overall course rating was very similar. It actually went down a very slight bit. We had a result right now, preliminary MIT physics. I mentioned technology-enabled active learning, technology-enhanced active learning. They put in enhancements. We don't know about results for learning outcomes yet. What we do know, sorry, that's a quote from the chemistry course. What we do know is that the vast majority of the students really like this. And this has been something we've seen in every case except San Jose State. Now, that's what we've seen in a residential setting. What have we seen in a pure online setting? To the best of my knowledge, there's only one relatively rigorous evaluation of learning outcomes in an online course. That was done by Dave Piotr at MIT, who took the same pretest and post-test that Hockey did, the 60 course array you saw at the beginning, and he did this in his MOOC. And he had two interesting results. One of which was that it did, in fact, properly calibrate for background knowledge. This methodology appeared to work. And the second one was that in a pure online setting, we're already beating traditional residential courses. We're not doing as well as interactive engagement residential courses, but we're beating traditional courses. So that's roughly what we know about how well the platform works for teaching and learning. And the next question is, why? So first of all, I'll mention, are there any questions right now?
One of the main assumptions I'm assuming with that is that you take the course to completion if it's an e-learning, or if it's a purely online course.
So in the purely online course, the way that David Piotr managed the question of student dropout, there's a technique called idle response theory, where you can calibrate other assessments to a standardized exam. And he looked at learning gains for students from week to week, which is not completely rigorous, but it's sort of a sniff test to see what happens with the students who are dropping out along the course. And the impression that he got was that the result was rigorous, but again, this is a sniff test. This is not a complete control.
Can you go back to the bar graph for just one moment, and those gains that you saw there, one more, those gains, do you attribute that to the fact that the students could go back the next day and master the, take the test again? Is that?
The course step attributed to that, it was a very complex set of interventions, so we don't actually know. Many of them were blended, many of them were related to edX, some were not.
Did you actually talk to students subsequent to them taking the course to find out whether they were going back to take the test over and over again?
Oh, so this is the final exam. This was not a place where students could take the test over and over. The assessments throughout the course were over and over. On average, students would make 2 attempts per assessment throughout the run of the course, but the exam test was not an option.
About this same course here, I'm not sure if it was just your choice of words, but you said that when they came back, they would take a different assessment?
Correct.
Was it different in content, or was it different in presentation of the content?
It was different. So there's a bank of assessments in chemistry that are around learning objectives, and they would get a random assessment from that bank.
So
Same learning objective, but a different question. Some were numerical, they would have 3 attempts. Some were multiple choice, they would have 1 attempt.
So these are really impressive gains. However, I assume that some of the gain is from improving the alignment of the curriculum and the assessments, right? The changes that you made, there's sort of an unknown but unknowable sort of advantage that comes from enhancing that alignment, unless you control for it otherwise.
I don't think that was the case in the context of this course. This was a very complex intervention, so there were many things which this does not control for. I don't have any evidence. This was a course which really has been polished over many years, and that alignment was relatively good. There are a lot of reasons to believe that I don't think that particular problem was the case. There are other things that are not controlled for. So, for example, students can walk out mid-exam. Because the pass rate is 50%, students can walk out partway through the exam. There are a lot of things that can happen that are not controlled for. I don't think that's one of them. This was a very
So the problems are the same and the problem sets that they're working on
They're
are
similar.
unchanged?
They're changed, but they're similar. So I think I'll actually go back to questions later on. I don't want to run quite out of time, but the basic platform was based on 7 principles, which I will not explain, I will summarize. One of them is to get the students actively engaged in the learning process and to give them some control over it. Perhaps not the radical control that George Siemens would advocate for, but a little bit of control. Let the student know whether they understand something, provide rapid feedback, and if they don't understand something, give them the tools to fix it. I won't go through all of the ways that the platform was designed to do this. I'll give a couple of exemplars of this. So this is a screen from the main platform. As most of you have seen, there are learning sequences that interleave assessments, videos, text, interactives. And in many cases, there are back-to-back videos, video, but usually one of those videos ends with a question. And the next video starts with answering that question. And there are assessments which actually check how the student answers some of those questions. This gives a way of students to continuously assess, and if you use it correctly, you can use this to do something called constructive learning, which is not constructivist learning. They sound similar, they're very different.
Okay, what is it? Because I was going to immediately ask you.
So there will be a QR code that links to an explanation of it. This was a term coined by Mickey Chi from Arizona State University. It's basically students deriving information for themselves. But it's not in the
Constructing
free
their
form.
knowledge, but not constructing something. So they're constructing their own knowledge.
For example, let's say I give,
An object to
let's say, for example, I give you a problem set where I ask you to prove the Pythagorean theorem, but I tell you basically everything all the way. You're the one constructing the knowledge, but I'm guiding you through it. That would be an example of constructive learning that's not constructivist. Most constructivist techniques are constructive as well, but constructive can be a lot more narrow in scope. So if a student identifies that they don't understand something, they can navigate back to, I'm talking, you phase out for a minute, you realize when I asked a question that you didn't get that, you can navigate back to that precise point. If that still doesn't help, there are links to additional resources, and if that doesn't help, there's a Q&A forum. And in the original platform, this really was just a Q&A forum. The current one is a lot more complex, designed for discussion, things like that. Originally, this was question and answer. It's a bank of common student misconceptions, remediations for those, and students were using it as such. Students read 300 times as many questions as they asked. So, bank of self-guide to a remediation for a misconception.
This is interactive residential exam, not necessarily pure online.
This is both. This is the platform.
Okay.
And I think I'll skip over this. There are a lot of ways for students to self-navigate, self-regulate. In addition to that,
Part of self-regulated learning though is that the student actually don't need to be prompted because they could be students become frustrated, they give up. And when they're self-regulated, they have that sort of internal motivation to get through the confusing parts or the difficult parts, and they can regulate their time. They persist. So I don't see where the
Okay.
platform.
so actually,
there.
I'll spend a little bit more time on the slide. I'm down to 5 minutes. But basically what we try to do is provide a guided pathway for the students, but not force a guided pathway. So provide a lot of tools where students can navigate to specific points. And a very common way that students interact with the platform is they'll go through and do all of the assessments. If they have a problem with an assessment, they'll go back and watch the videos before the assessment and sort of catch up. And then, there are a lot of different pathways that students can take through the material. So it's not completely self-regulated in the sense that a C-book might be, but it provides some tools to allow students to do some level of self-regulation and have some level of control over that learning process.
I would call that customization, not self-regulation, though. Because it's they can customize
Yeah,
the learning
let's,
pathway, but.
I was actually suggesting we take this offline because I think that's
Yeah.
going to be. I can see your point. I think that the response to that will more than eat up the rest of my time. So the other thing that, and I think it's a fair point. I'll just leave it, it's a fair point. But the other thing that happens, another example is in the assessments. The assessments are designed around mastery learning. The original platform didn't support multiple choice questions. It had numeric answers, symbolic answers, and Christopher wrote this brilliant sort of semantic editor. And what that meant was that students could keep trying until they got the answer right. There was a question, design a circuit, you design it, you get it wrong, you just get this little red check, or a little red X, try again, until you get it right. And you don't punish students for failure. That's very nice, both from a motivational standpoint and from a mastery learning standpoint and a gamification standpoint. And so a lot of these are the things we did right. I promised low-hanging fruit. I'll give 2 of them. We're down to 3 minutes. One is that even though we did that very well, we guide instructors to not use this. By default, they're encouraged to put in checkboxes, drop out, and multiple choice questions. And there are very good reasons for those, but the default pathway ideally should make it easy to use the more complex types. So if you have creative ideas about how to do that well, pull requests. We encourage slicing videos into short segments, but the process for doing this takes forever. You take a video, slice it into 20 segments in a video editor, take subtitles, splice them, upload all of these to YouTube, give them titles in YouTube, in the unit in Studio, for the video in Studio, cut and paste all of the YouTube URLs, and then you add the discussion links, textbook links, and all the other code at the bottom. For 20 videos, this takes a lot of time. So basically, I mentioned there were low-hanging fruit, easy changes you can make to UX to make things a lot more effective. That's an example of the types of things that would be wonderful to see this community improve. I think I'm at this point out of time. So my parting thoughts are a call to arms. First of all, learn about learning. These 3 QR codes at the bottom are no longer citations. They're links to 2 books about learning, fantastic ones, and a short course about learning in the edX platform. If you do those 3 things, you'll know more about how students learn than 90% of the people who teach courses at universities, or who, you're laughing because you think that's a low number. It probably is. As well as more than 90% of the people who design educational technology. Keep learning in mind as you design things. As you build features for this platform, think about how that interacts with the things from here. Fix the low-hanging fruit, and just remember, small changes can make a really big difference. And by that, I mean, there isn't much correlation between technological complexity and educational effectiveness. Really simple technologies can be really effective if they're well designed. It just takes more thought up front. And the impact of this is tremendous. You saw the learning gains we've seen both before edX and after edX. If we can improve learning just by 30%, that's a very modest outcome. People finishing high school will have the equivalent of a university degree. Small changes you make to the technology, big outcomes not just for the platform, but for the world. So that's the parting thought, and I'll leave that, and I'll open up for questions.
Is your data available so that, for example, I have a doctoral student who wants to do a dissertation on MOOCs. Is your data accessible so that he could use it as fodder for his dissertation?
That's a complex question. So the data that edX has is governed by a set of federal laws. The major one is called FERPA, which was written in the 70s, before computers were really practical. And that set of laws makes it very hard to broadly release the data. At this point, institutions own their own data, so if you have a Harvard bag, you can get access to the Harvard X data from Jim Waldo. We're working on cross-institutional data sharing agreements that will be compliant with the law, figuring out how to broadly release the data in a way that both respects the law as well as student privacy. This is how well students are doing courses. These are your grades. It's a hard problem. We're working on it. Harvard and MIT got together and de-identified some of the data it's really not good enough to do research on. That was publicly released. We're very open to suggestions. We have a lot of requests like this, and if someone gives us a solution, we will release the data, but we don't think there is a clean and easy solution, so we're working on increasingly good approximations.
So your opinion about connectivity and CMOS, how are MIT and Harvard and edX picking up?
So my opinion is that CMOS have a lot of very good ideas. Most of the CMOS I have taken did not work as well as they could, largely because they didn't have the necessary technological support. The platform was originally engineered with the original platform I was building it was designed to teach circuits and electronics very well, and it does it very well based on that set of principles. We can develop a platform to teach other kinds of courses very well. It takes time, effort, and resources, and it doesn't support some things very well, but there's certainly a very good set of ideas there that we'd like to bring in over time.
What do you think is the role of edX or of the participating institutions in sort of guiding teachers towards practicing these 7 basic principles that you laid out? Because I think it would be very easy to use the tools that you provide in edX, but make a course that is very much not guided by these principles.
We have a lot of courses that are not guided by those principles, that's true. Those are also principles that, so one of the decisions that edX took was to be very agnostic about pedagogy at the beginning in order to foster innovation outside of edX. So in the early days, I was very strongly asked to not share a lot of the guidance about how to create effective courses outside of edX, and that resulted in a lot of that guidance coming in from a wider community, which was a lot more effective. This middle bullet, this middle QR code will actually have a little short course about some of the design pedagogy, but that's specific to, first of all, STEM courses in many cases. And in many cases, it's my ideas. It's not as good as the ideas of the 160 participants here, and at the Hungary Professor Carter's solutions, it's a much bigger thing than this. So that's part of the reason why you've seen limited guidance coming out. I think you'll see a little bit more in the future, but that community had to really form first.
I suppose that's kind of part of the big data analysis, is sort of figuring out what those best practices are.
I think part of it is big data analysis. Honestly, there are mature industries and immature industries. In a mature industry, you use big data to measure 0.1% effects and tweak from there. In an immature industry, there are a lot of effects that are kind of, the level of obviousness is like getting slapped across the face with a trout. So we're still, a lot of this is still at that level. There are basic principles in cognitive science. We've known them for 20 or 30 years. We need to build an affordance of a platform that will support that. When you do that, you know, maybe we'll be wrong about 5% of the stuff, but in most cases it's still pretty obvious. Once we get past the obvious stuff, you get into medium data, then big data, and then bigger data. And we certainly do big data analysis within edX for some things. For example, recently I looked at courses for bias, and that's a very much a big data problem. We saw which assessments didn't work well in certain cultures. But there's a lot of small data problems as well.
You may not be the right person that I can ask, and this may not be the right place. And do you happen to know why maybe MIT is operating edX and MITx separately?
MIT is not operating edX. edX is a, so edX started out as MITx. At some point Harvard joined and MIT joined and created a new initiative called edX. So the code base started as MITx. MIT Harvard came together, created edX with the same code base, new organization. It's an independent not-for-profit. At this point, it's a consortium of, how many universities at this point, Victor? 50 some universities. And each of them has an organization that works closely with edX in terms of creating the courses. MITx is the counterpart from MIT that works with edX.
The question was about the platform, why there's an MITx and edX.
Yeah, why do they have to have an operation?
Right, so I guess the answer for that is that edX we have different needs, right? edX runs a website with massive courses, while MIT is running their courses for on campus. So they have to, when they add features, they have to add features quickly and not wait for edX to merge them into master.
I think a very big part of it is a lot of universities, a lot of institutions have forks. I'll give a couple of examples. MIT built a feature called idle response theory. It's a psychometric technique that identifies problems by difficulty. This would not scale the way that they built to thousands of students. This was like residential use. They have great book functionality, other kinds of analytics, and that's operating their fork. And in many cases, these are good ideas, so they will work to productionize those, and at that point integrate them into edX. In many cases, they will continue running their own fork. And as sort of you saw at the talk earlier, Beth said that edX itself needs to move into its own fork. We have a lot of features as well which don't make sense for the broader community, the main platform. Integrations with specific partners, that sort of thing.
Could you just flip to the last slide so we can see the link to the presentation? I think it was the last page. It had a link at the bottom.
Yeah. So this is how people learn from National Academy Press.
I just meant one more to the, that one.
NACC.
Yeah, there we go. NACC EC 14.
Yep. Sure. One more question? Anyone?